Chapter 1. The shattered path. The wind was ruthless that night. A storm had been brewing for hours, a low, growling threat that had set the air heavy with foreboding. I was clinging to the side of the stagecoach as it bounced over the uneven trail, the horses straining against the harsh wind. Snowflakes, sharp and biting, swirled in the air like 1,000 small daggers, each one stinging my face and cutting through the layers of fabric I'd worn for warmth. The coach lurched and swayed, as if the storm itself wanted to throw us off the road and into the endless wasteland that lay beyond. The driver cursed under his breath, and I could hear the sound of the horses' hooves hitting the frozen ground as though they too were fighting against the inevitable. Then came the crack. The coach hit something, be a rock or a hole in it. Earthing. Suddenly, the entire wagon pitched violently to the side. I gasped as the world tilted, my stomach rising in my throat. My arms shot out instinctively to grasp anything solid, and then nothing. The darkness took me. I woke to the sound of the storm still howling louder now. The wagon was broken, splintered, into pieces around me. The horses were whinnying, tangled in the wreckage. Sharp pain shot through my head, and I realized I wasn't alone. I forced my eyes open, squinting against the ice that was now covering my skin, and saw a man, his silhouette blocking out the moonlight above. Easy now. His voice was gruff but calm. You're safe. I felt myself being lifted gently, his arms strong beneath me. I tried to move, but my body ached too much, and I could only collapse back into the warmth of his chest. My breath was ragged, and my heart was still racing. The world was spinning, and I couldn't tell if the storm was real or if it was just the pounding of my own pulse in my ears. Who are you? Managed to whisper. Randall Blackwood, he said softly. You're in Del Rio, Texas. You're a long way from home, Miss McAllister.
McAllister?
27, newly orphaned, with nothing but a few letters of credit and a dream to escape the shackles of my past. I had come from Pennsylvania, leaving behind a life that had turned into nothing more than a cage. My family had sold me off to a man I didn't love, a man who had promised me a life of security. That man, Thomas Cartwright, had abandoned me when I needed him the most. When my father's debts caught up with him, he had left me with nothing but a broken heart and a shattered reputation. I had no choice but to leave everything behind. Everything but the pain, the shame, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something more for me out here. Something different, something real. And now here I was, lost and stranded in a strange town, with a man who had taken me in with no questions asked, a man who I knew nothing about, but whose kindness already felt like a weight I wasn't sure I could bear. Randall Blackwood, a man of few words, but a presence so commanding it made me feel both uneasy and safe at the same time. I had never seen a man like him. His shoulders were broad, his dark hair tousled, and his face was a patchwork of shadows and hard angles. His eyes were piercing like a storm cloud on the horizon, but there was something deeper in them. Something buried, something that made me wonder what it was he was running from. Your wagon's gone, Randall said as he set me down gently on the porch of his small, rugged cabin. The horses are a mess, but I'll get them sorted. You'll be all right. You've had a rough go. I nodded weakly, my head throbbing. Thank you, I said quietly, unsure if I meant it or if I was just too tired to speak. I don't know how I got here. You don't have to explain. He cut me off, his tone surprisingly soft. You're safe now, but was I really safe? Or had I just traded one kind of misery for another? A part of me wanted to ask about the storm, about what had happened to the coach, about where I was and who he was. But another part of me felt that I would never be able to escape the past, no matter how many miles I put between me and the world I came from. Maybe this was just the next chapter in a story I couldn't outrun. Randall didn't say much more as he led me inside the cabin. The warmth of the fire inside felt like an embrace after the cold wilderness I'd just escaped. The walls were rough-hewn, the floor creaked with every step, and there was an old wooden table in the center with mismatched chairs scattered around it. There was a rifle propped up in the corner, and the smell of cooked food wafted through the air. I collapsed into one of the chairs, trying to steady my breath. Randall didn't sit with me. He moved around the cabin, stoking the fire, checking on a pot hanging over the hearth. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice weak. "Del Rio?" he answered briefly. "Far from where you're used to, I reckon." I couldn't help but stare at him as he moved about the room. The silence between us was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just ... His presence. It was grounding. But it also made me aware of how small I felt. How unimportant. "I've seen a lot of people pass through this town," Randall said, his back turned to me as he stirred the pot. "But I haven't seen someone like you. What brought you out here?" I hesitated, unsure if I should reveal. Too much, but I felt the need to speak. I needed him to understand that I wasn't just some fragile, naive woman wandering into the unknown. "I've been running from my past," I said quietly. "I've been trying to escape. My life, the life they wanted for me. The life that wasn't mine." I could see him nod out of the corner of my eye. "I get it," he murmured. "You run because you don't know how to stay. That doesn't mean you'll find what you're looking for." I thought about that for a long moment. Was this what I had been searching for? Was this cold, isolated cabin truly a refuge from the heartache and betrayal I had left behind? Or was I simply trading one prison for another? The next morning, Randall was already up before the sun. I could hear him moving about the cabin, the sound of horses being tended to outside, and the occasional creak of wood as he worked. I stayed in the cabin, the silence settling over me like a blanket. It was so quiet. It's too quiet. But I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I had no family, no friends here, no money, no prospects. Just a long road ahead that felt as empty and endless as the wilderness outside. Randall came back in later, carrying a heavy load of firewood and a saddlebag filled with supplies. He set it down with a grunt, wiping the sweat from his brow as he looked at me. "You can stay as long as you need," he said, his voice distant. "But I've got work to do. And you might want to get used to it, because it ain't gonna be easy. I'm not a soft man, Clara, and I can't promise you any comfort. But if you're willing to fight for it, this land might offer you something more than you think." I met his gaze, the intensity in his eyes unsettling me. He wasn't asking for anything in return, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling me, something that could change everything. But for now, all I could do was nod. "I'll do whatever it takes," I whispered, unsure if I believed it myself. And with that, the storm outside raged on, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as lost as I thought. Maybe this man, this place, could help me find a way back to who I was, or who I was meant to be continued. ... Chapter 2. The night before the storm, the wind had been relentless since we arrived. But tonight, it felt like something more. The air was thick with tension, as though the very earth itself could sense the storm on the horizon, could hear it. In the rustling of the trees, the distant howl of wolves, and the way the cabin creaked under the pressure of the coming night, Randall was quiet beside me. His eyes fixed on the fire, his jaw clenched. We had barely spoken since the moment we found shelter, but the silence between us felt heavy, filled with unsaid words and unasked questions. I could feel the weight of the past pressing on him, just as I could feel the weight of my own shattered heart. He had his scars, and I had mine. But in the quiet of that cabin, I found solace in knowing that at least for now, we were not alone. "Don't know how you do it," I said finally. Breaking the silence, Randall turned his head slightly, but didn't meet my eyes. "Do what? Survive?" I said softly. "Every day, this place, the pain." He let out a long breath, a sound that felt like the weight of years behind it. Some days I wonder myself. I could see it in the deep, invisible scars he carried, the ones that ran far deeper than any wound I could see. It was there in the way his eyes shifted when he spoke of his past. It was there in the way his shoulders tensed when the wind picked up, and it was there in the silence he wore like armor. Silence that told me there was much more to Randall Blackwood than he let on. The fire crackled in the hearth. I couldn't help but watch him, feeling an undeniable pull toward him, He was strong, but he was broken. As much as I had my own demons to face, something told me that his were far more dangerous, far more destructive. The storm outside began to grow fiercer, and as the wind howled louder, a sudden knock at the door sent my heart into my throat. "Stay inside," Randall said, his voice sharp as he rose to his feet. I didn't argue. He had a way of making you feel safe even when you weren't. He reached for his rifle, his fingers brushing the cold metal as he moved toward the door. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a voice that I didn't recognize. "Randall, open up." My breath caught in my chest. There was something in the voice familiar, it's almost threatening, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Randall paused for a moment, his hand on the door. "Stay inside," he repeated. But this time, there was a note of uncertainty. In his voice, I didn't know what it was, but something told me that tonight was going to be different. That something, or someone, was about to change everything. The door creaked open slowly, and the figure that stepped into the room was a man I hadn't seen in years. "Randall, it's been too long," the man said, his voice cold and hard. Like the wind that howled outside, I could see the tension in Randall's body, the way his jaw clenched, and for a moment it felt like the room itself held its breath. "Jesse," Randall said quietly, his voice tight. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jesse stepped into the cabin, his eyes scanning the room before settling on me. His gaze lingered a moment too long, and I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something about him that unsettled me, something that didn't feel right. "Came to talk," Jesse said, his eyes flicking back to Randall. "You owe me that much." Randall's hand tightened around the rifle, but he didn't raise it. "I don't owe you anything." The silence that followed was thick with history, with words left unsaid. I could see the tension in Randall's posture, the way his muscles were coiled like a spring ready to snap. But Jesse wasn't done. "You think you can just hide out here?" Jesse's voice grew louder, his anger evident. "You think you can leave everything behind and start fresh? You've got debts, Randall, and I'm here to collect." I stood up from my chair, my pulse quickening. "What debts?" I asked, my voice shaking with the weight of the unknown. Jesse turned to me, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "Don't worry, Miss McAllister. I'll get to you in a minute." Randall stepped in front of me, his body blocking Jesse's view. "Leave her out of this," he growled. But Jesse wasn't done yet. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he glared at Randall. "You've been running from your past for too long, Randall. It's time to pay the price." Before I could react, Jesse pulled something from his jacket, a piece of paper, yellowed with a jand, threw it down onto the table. I could feel the tension in the room escalate, the air thick with the promise of violence. "Do you recognize this?" Jesse asked, his voice cold. Randall's eyes flicked to the paper, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in his expression, a flicker of fear, or perhaps regret. "I told you to stay away from this," Randall said, his voice low and dangerous. Jesse laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You don't get to make the rules anymore, Randall. You're in my debt, and it's time to settle up." The room was still, the weight of the confrontation hanging in the air like a storm cloud on the verge of breaking. I didn't know what had happened between these two men, but I knew that it wasn't good. I knew that whatever Jesse wanted, Randall had already paid a heavy price for it. And now, it seemed that the time had come for that price to be paid in full. Jesse took another step toward me, his eyes narrowing as he looked me over. "I should have known it was you," he said, his tone laced with disdain. A pretty little thing like you falling into Randall's lap. You're just like the others, aren't you? Looking for someone to protect you." I could feel my anger rising, but before I could say anything, Randall stepped between us, his chest rising with each breath, his body like a wall of stone. "Don't get to talk to her like that," he said, his voice deadly quiet. For a moment, Jesse didn't say anything. His eyes flicked between the two of us as if weighing the situation, sizing us up. "I'm not here to fight you, Randall," Jesse said, his voice lowering. "I'm just here to collect." But Randall wasn't backing down. His eyes burned with something dark, something I couldn't fully understand. "You'll have to kill me first," he said, his voice steady like he was making a promise. Jesse's eyes narrowed, his hand twitching toward his own gun, but before he could make a move, there was a sharp sound, a gunshot echoing through the night. the world slowed down. The next few moments felt like an eternity. I could feel the air around me crackle with tension. The space between us thick with the heat of anger and fear. Jesse staggered back, his hand clutching at his side where blood began to seep through. His fingers. Randall stood frozen, his gun still raised, his eyes fixed on Jesse as the blood dripped onto the floor. "You should have stayed away," Randall said, his voice low and filled with something I couldn't place regret. Maybe relief. But there was no fear in his eyes, just cold, unflinching resolve. Jesse's face twisted in pain, but he managed to grin. "This isn't over, Randall. You can't keep running forever." With those final words, Jesse stumbled backward, his body collapsing to the ground. The room fell silent again. The only sound, the crackling of the fire as it burned low. I stood there, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Randall's hand was still on the gun, his breath coming in slow, deliberate gasps. He turned to me then, his eyes dark but filled with something deeper, something that had been buried beneath the surface. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. We both knew that this wasn't over. What Jesse had come to do was only the beginning. But in that moment, in the aftermath of the violence, something shifted between us. Something that told me this was the turning point. The moment where everything changed. I stepped forward, my heart racing, unsure of what to do next. But before I could say a word, Randall reached for me, pulling me into him, his body warm and solid against mine. And in that moment, all of the pain, all of the fear, all of the uncertainty that had surrounded me since I arrived began to fade away. For the first time since I'd left my old life behind, I felt like I was finally where I belonged. Whatever came next, we would face it together.